Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching.
Today we are going to stay curious about stress and how that relates to coaching, as well as our own personal lives as examples, to see maybe how there may be some strategies or ideas or philosophies around how do we handle stress in a way that is healthy for ourselves and a way that's hopeful for ourselves as well. And stress is something that has been on both of our minds lately with the new year. It truly is the year of the horse, and we're feeling that both here, L Shawn and I, as we sit and have this conversation. So even for our own good today, we are exploring this topic in the hope that we take things away for ourselves to actually use in our day-to-day living and improve our daily life and our health outcomes too. I have a very storied history with stress. I really struggled with it in my first career right out of undergrad, so much so that I would get very panicked, and then I had an ulcer from all of the stress that I was navigating, because at that time, one, was extremely hard on myself. Two, I didn't have conditions in place to necessarily support my understanding of stress and the support that I needed to handle my stress well. And three, I was much younger and didn't have as much wisdom as I can carry today from the experience of really trying to hold on to this stress. And for me, looking back at my early 20s in that time period where I was just consistently beyond stressed, I didn't have the tools. And at that point, I didn't even want to learn the tools because I felt like there was no time or space to do that, for one. And then on top of that, I was in a very different environment. And so I do know that when we can have agency over our own stress, that makes a big difference. And sometimes there are more stressful environments than others that can make stress that much more challenging. And so how then do you stay afloat and navigate those more calm environments as well as those more stressful environments? Because it's not like you won't feel the stress. It's not like stress is just magically going away. It's a matter of how to tend to it and how to have not only your own internal control over those stress responses, but also put yourself into places that are helpful for you in supporting those contexts for your health, for your good outcomes, and those sorts of things. And so there's so much here that I'm just kind of considering as I look back on my early 20s and how stressed I really was and how much pressure I put on myself as an individual, that now I know that I just can't do that, right? So like I've grown out of that way of thinking about stress. And at this point, I've also been lucky to be exposed to different types of stress integration techniques through breathing, through grounding, through asking for help, getting support, clearing calendars, setting boundaries, all those things that sometimes might feel like they create more stress, but when you do them in an aligned way, they actually help you out. So I just kind of dumped a lot that's been on my mind lately about stress. It is tax season, trying to get all of my business information out there for that, and then dealing with some challenges in different parts of my work, and then dealing with some health challenges with some kids at home. So it's been a little bit of a rushed January into February. So I'm looking forward to our conversation and all the wisdom, L Shawn, that you always have to share too, to root back into myself and stay grounded as stress might increase.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there. And I would say that I also I've been on kind of a journey in terms of how to deal with stress and how stress affects my life. And there's certain responses that we have when we're in high stress situations. And I'm sure our listeners have heard the 4 F's, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fawn is that fourth F that few people really understand or know about. We know about the fight, flight, or freeze, but fawn is something I think that might be something that is related to maybe humans more so than animals. I don't know that animals fawn when they're in danger, but they might. I don't know. I don't know enough about all animals and how they respond to danger. But one thing that comes to mind is something that I heard in a workshop that I was in, and it was about making stress your superpower. It was facilitated by Avani Dilger. She's the executive director and founder of Natural Highs, which is an organization in Boulder that works with youth on substance abuse prevention, and they work with the youth who are peer-to-peer support in that way. And one thing that she does is this workshop called Make Stress Your Superpower. And one of the things that she talks about is the neurology behind stress and stress response, and how we are in a society that causes chronic stress. And so when you go back to like prey animals, when they're in the wild and they're running and they've got all this adrenaline and everything going, and what happens to a prey animal when they are captured by the predator, or if, let's say, it's a close call and they get away from the predator and the predator doesn't catch the prey. What happens to the prey animal is that its whole body will shake, or it will just collapse. So there's this sense of surrender and release, and this kind of goes back to the theme of letting go that we talk about in our episodes. This idea of letting go, which comes to mind for me when I think about prey animals when they're in that moment of danger where they're almost going to be caught by the predator and the predator doesn't catch them, they get away. They have a way to release that adrenaline, to release all of those chemicals that get pumped through the body when we are responding to a threat. And so what happens in our modern society is that we're constantly in a state of alert and maybe even hypervigilance. I mean, if you think about deadlines, Eryn, you were just talking about tax season. These things come up in our lives and they're just nonstop. There's very little room often to release, because let's say you have a deadline to meet. So your adrenaline's pumping, your body's getting ready for this, and you meet that deadline, and then there's another deadline, and then there's doctor's appointments, and there's all these things that are just piled one after the other. Whereas if you are a prey animal, it's not likely, it's rare that that predator that you got away from there's going to be another predator and another predator and another predator that you're going to have to be running from the predator multiple times. There's times where you can release. There's times where you can have an outlet for those hormones and adrenaline and all of those things that happen when we cortisol when we are in a high stress situation. So when you don't have a place to release that power, that energy, that your body is getting ready for, to run, to fight, or that you're freezing or fawning, those things there's not a chance for you to release. And so that's one of the things that we need when we are in high stress situations. So how do we give ourselves time to release when we have one deadline that's done and then another deadline looming? What do we do? So one thing that I think is really important to do in between those deadlines and in between those tasks that we finish, especially if they're high stress or they're draining tasks, like they drain our energy, they don't fill up our battery, but they drain our battery, is to, take some time to just breathe or go for a walk. One of the things that I learned in this workshop, Make Stress Your Superpower, is the importance of giving yourself that release. So one thing that Avani talked about was pushing on a wall, like with all your might. And that's a way for you to get that extra adrenaline and extra like cortisol and that kind of thing out, to give you an outlet. So it's really important to have an outlet. That's one thing that I have learned about stress management, the importance of surrender, letting go, and also giving yourself an outlet. What things come to mind for you, Eryn?
I think the main thing that I took away from what you were talking about is that kind of reset or that pause when things are highly stressful. And so I think the imagery I get from that is this shift of your own being. So you're in all in something, it's highly stressful, and then you intentionally make a pause. You intentionally take a pause to disrupt what's going on. And I think that that can be really useful in stress, as far as intention there and saying, recognizing maybe being in, flight, fight, freeze, or even fawn. Those are all clear stress responses in different ways. When we are reflective about our responses in those moments, we can then say, okay, I'm going to be intentional in these moments too. So my intention during this moment to disrupt this is to feel my feet on the ground, is to do my favorite breathing exercise. And for me, that's through heart math, the heart coherence, where you sync your heart rate with your breath. And it's a really cool experience. I've found it really healing in my own journey. So I think things like that can help with stress. The other thing I think is a shift in language. We always shift away from saying time management. Maybe with stress management, we switch the language there too and just say stress integration or acknowledging stress, because we don't want to try to manage the stress necessarily. That sounds a little bit less human focused. So I like this idea of just saying, I have stress, or this stress is hindering me in this way. So I'm going to respond to stress. So stress response or stress alignment or things like that. I think that gives us more power instead of trying to feel like we have to kind of push it in a certain way. So that's one of the other pieces of imagery that I kind of have coming to me right now too. And the other thing with stress is I think there is a level of wisdom in patterns and behaviors that you see within yourself throughout the years, and you can be more intentional with those to then use those in your own favor. And so I think the key word through all of this is intention, because, back in my early 20s with that example and getting an ulcer and just being highly stressed, I never could really internalize or recognize what would be most helpful. It was more of like that stress response kept creating more stress and more stress. And I coped with more stress-like behaviors, which were not necessarily healthy behaviors. So I think that just having some space from a little bit of that situation and removing myself from certain environments, I think is also another way to respond to stress. I know with anything we talk about with coaching and anything really in life, it really is more about focusing inward, right? Like, what can I do to make this better rather than these external conditions? But sometimes we do need to shift the external conditions by moving ourselves away, or by leaning into something a little bit differently, or by creating a new relationship within the context of where we're at with the stress. So yes, there's a lot of the internal focus during the stress response on how can I breathe? How can I go take a walk? How can I change my day-to-day calendar a little bit? How can I do all these other things? And then on the other end of it, it could be looking at external factors too. I might need to remove myself from this, or I might need to recalibrate how I spend my time and things like that. And also just like the other piece for me that I just feel so deeply with stress is shame. It's such a concept that I think the two connect in so many ways, because in one way, if we don't have a lot of stress, there's like this inherent societal response. Oh, you should feel ashamed because you're not doing enough. Or there's this level of like, oh, you're countercultural because you're opting out of things. And on the other end of that, it's like, no, that's not what's going on here. So I think that that's also a big challenge when we talk about stress and and especially in our adulthood and trying to be parents to our kids who deal with stress. We want them to have a healthy level of stress, which we can have some influence over, but we also want them to start gaining skills to respond to high stress or to respond to stress. And so it's always this push and pull. And, with within our own selves, if we can model that, I think with our youth or with our own kids, I think that can be helpful too, just by saying aloud, wow, I'm really stressed right now. I can feel my heart rate racing. I'm getting really upset. I'm really angry. I can then say, okay, wow, how do I respond to that? And show that as an example of how to handle my own stress situation, and also have a learning opportunity for my kids.
One thing that I was thinking about is the idea of feeling like you don't know where to begin, or you don't know what you need, or even that you feel like you don't have the time or the resources to do what is necessary or what will help you with your stress. And then the other piece that you mentioned about modeling to our children how to recognize when we have high stress, or when we are experiencing a stress response, and modeling that by like kind of speaking about what's going on. Because I think a lot of times with kids, I think it's important for them to be able to recognize, oh, I'm feeling frustrated. Here is a healthy outlet for frustration. And also to recognize that it's okay to be frustrated, to be disappointed, to feel anger, to feel sadness, that these things are normal part of life, and they're just spectrum of emotions that we go through. They're neither good nor bad, but they're information. And so when we have this information, this is what we can do with this information. Like some certain emotions feel good, other emotions don't feel so good. And so we might feel uncomfortable, or we might feel embarrassed, or we might feel, like certain things that are happening in our body, like tense shoulders or queasy tummy, those kinds of things. So just being able to have that conversation with our kids, I think, is really important. And not only that, just as you were talking, Eryn, about like my heart's racing, I'm feeling frustrated, that like being able to say that out loud, to voice that, is also really important too. I think just talking through it and recognizing it also has a calming effect. When we can tell ourselves, oh wow, I'm really tense, or I'm clenching my fists, or I'm wringing my hands. Like that's one of the things that I become more aware of. Like, oh, what am I doing in this moment? Like I'm clenching my jaw, or I'm not breathing. That's another thing that happens to
Not
me
breathing.
when I'm in stressful situations. I often hold my breath, and so I check in with myself and I say, okay, am I breathing? You know, am I breathing? Are my shoulders moving? Is this, let's just breathe and stay centered and focused on the present. Because often what escalates stress, or makes it even more impactful, is thinking about the outcome. Be really outcome focused. Like, if this continues, this bad thing will happen. If I don't stop this now, this bad thing is going to happen. And rather than really looking at what's happening in the moment, and really focusing on, okay, so what's happening now, as opposed to what's going to happen or what might happen. So those are some things that came to mind as you were thinking. It's just the idea of being aware of what's happening to us when we are having a stress response, and what we can do for like our children in terms of modeling for them healthy ways to handle stress. And one thing that came up when you were talking earlier is the idea of bringing this. And I know that at least in my son's school, they're doing this, where they're working with kids and they're giving them the tools that they need in order to handle stress or handle conflict, or navigate those situations with tools that they can use. I just remember that my son was talking about something having to do with how to handle bullies, and what to say and what to do. So, and then also thinking about like the confidence with which he talked about that, and how there's a sense of calm and ease when you have those tools and you know those tools. So you've done the work, you've role played, or you've talked to your teachers, or you've talked to adults. So I think that's really important for children as well, is to have that in the curriculum, to have that as part of their, their school day, talking about how you handle these situations when you're frustrated, when you're embarrassed, when you make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake, those things, and letting um, kids know that these are the tools that you can use, because when I was growing up, we didn't really talk about that. We didn't have that resource, which I think is great what they're doing now in schools, giving kids those resources. I think that is definitely a step in the right direction. And I think that if the more that we can do that with kids, and the younger that they are, the better. Like even in preschool, just teaching them how to respect boundaries, and all of those things that are done in like licensed preschools, or licensed early childhood education. That's part of the curriculum. And so I think just having that as part of not only the curriculum in school, but also support for parents. I think that would be really great too, because as a parent, knowing how to handle stress myself allows me to help my kids handle stress, and it allows me to model it. But if you don't have the tools and you don't have the knowledge, then it's difficult to do. So I think an effort to get this information out to parents, letting them know, new parents, letting them know these are the things that you can do when your child expresses frustration or anger, or when your child lashes out. These are some of the things that you can do, and not just like as like a pamphlet that you give to parents, but like something that can be something that parents can use, and that it doesn't take a lot of effort and time for them to like open a pamphlet and read it or whatever. But just like maybe even just have meetings or something for parents, is just kind of a thought that is kind of going through my head as a parent, a busy working parent. It's not it's a challenge to find the time. It really is. It's a challenge to find the time when you have a child who is struggling with issues that are maybe bigger than you have seen, or that are kind of beyond the scope of your knowledge. To like become a PhD in this in this topic so that you can help your kid is a challenge. And so I think just having like forums, or some way for kids, or for parents to have that knowledge and tools that they can use immediately, or they can apply to their situation. So those are some things that were coming to my mind.
Yeah, I
How
can
about you,
really hear your
Eryn?
passion for this work and the work that you do with your nonprofit, and then in your own personal life in terms of relating it back to, policy and practice within the K-12 system, and then the education of our caretakers of our youth, and how we understand our own stress responses and understand stress, and then how we can also help our youth as well. And I think that stress is a interesting one to grapple with, because I think there are very highly individualized responses as to what's going to work well based on people's own motivations, their own willingness or understanding to try a certain tool or strategy, and then also their own comfort with it. Is it a good fit? Does this work well for me? So stress is so complex, right? And we get it modeled in the home from early on from our own parents, and then we take on a lot of those behaviors, whether good or bad, and then as our own now as new parents, and trying to ensure that our kids can have opportunities to relate to their stress in healthy ways, so that they have a better future and they aren't in their early 20s in a high stress job and end up with an ulcer. Right? Like, it's those types of things that I think are important and can be impactful with us, like raising up this next generation as well. And then on the other end of it, as I sitting here just kind of relaxing into what you were saying, I'm more curious about, for you specifically, do you have an example of something that has been incredibly helpful, or at least pretty helpful, in your own stress? And what is that? And how could it be used in coaching?
One thing that I do is I use the techniques that we learned in positive intelligence coaching with the breathing, and taking the time to like really pay attention to my breathing. And that really helps. And that just happens. That's not just in, obviously, it's not just in positive intelligence coaching. That's just mindfulness. I find that very helpful. Another thing that I find helpful in stressful situations is to ask those coaching questions, right? Ask those coaching questions. What do I have control of? Or what can I do in this moment to ease the discomfort? Or what can I do to understand this person? Or just asking those questions to kind of keep myself grounded and in the present, as opposed to having my mind spiral into like things that could go wrong or things that I didn't do right, or things like that. So I find that is really helpful for me. One question that I ask myself is, what's happening now? Because I can really wind myself up with like all of the things that I need to do. And I'm like, okay, well, I ask myself, okay, so what's happening now in this moment? What needs to get done now? And so that kind of helps me stay grounded, stay focused in the present, and it helps me compartmentalize what's happening, or like what is on my agenda, what needs to get done later, and what needs to get done now. So as long as I can really focus myself in the present, then that allows me to take it one thing at a time. It's like, okay, so I know I have this stuff that I need to do, but I can focus on what's happening now. What do I need to get done now? So yeah, those powerful coaching questions, those questions that really help me stay grounded. The breathing. There's all kinds of different breathing techniques. There's box breathing, and um, you know, uh, when you're anxious, one thing that I find that really helps is breathing in and having a longer exhale, because when you have a longer exhale, it tells the body you're safe. And so, just giving your body the message, sending the message to your body, hey, you're safe. And then you can kind of reset and then approach what's happening in the now. So those are the things that really help for me. How about you, Eryn?
I love your long exhale. I was just doing it as you were talking. I don't know if you can see me over here. But
Yeah,
like,
I noticed.
okay, yeah. I like that one because it's so accessible in the moment. Box breathing is, but in different ways, right? It's not
Yeah,
that accessible.
yeah,
But so I like that. But I also, for me, it's a matter of getting out of my own way, of my own either self judgment or fear. Like those two things are driving my stress response consistently. So I think for me, it's doing, cognitive behavioral therapy with the therapist around those. I think it's doing coaching with coaches that can help me understand where that is, not only in my body and my mind, but how to use it as a source to move in a positive direction. And since those are two of the recurring themes for me, that self-judgment and fear, that disruption that we talked about at the beginning of the episode is so helpful. Okay, I need to completely shift gears. So I might need to go take a nap. I might need to go lay on a blanket and do a little gentle blanket yoga. Or I might need to go like the walk. The walk is always a good one. And I write about it in my book too, going on a walk in grief, and like how helpful it can be. But also sometimes it's not the right response because it feels a little bit too much. And then also talking through, since I am kind of more cerebral in some ways, like talking through these things with someone else, because then I can get out of that kind of thinking that I get into the cycle around. And then I think once I get into that space of a little bit more calm, I can access more of the breathing. And then it just kind of is like this ripple effect. Okay, so then going back to soothing the mind and then soothing the body and soothing the mind and soothing the body. And so I think for me, that's kind of what's been helpful for my needs in the past. And it also depends on like the root of the stressor. And all, again, it often relates to my own self-critical behavior or my fear. So like, what are the roots under those? okay, I'm afraid that nobody's going to accept me for who I am, or I'm scared that people are going to make fun of me in public, or, like just things like that. So then getting to those further roots of, okay, so then what? And then what? And how does that relate to where I'm at right now? And what is one small step I could take in the present, not worrying about those other things, but fully in the present that would help me right now? Some people like journaling, some people like music. I'm a big music person. If I can turn on some music, that's very soothing to me. Or playing the piano, that can also really soothe my whole self. So it is very, I guess as I'm talking through all of this, I'm realizing a little bit more forwardly how stress is so complicated, because even in my own response about what works well for me, it's all these different things. It's not like one of those things is going to work best in what every time. It's very complicated. And so I think the other thing I would want to say here is we as a society and culture need to do a lot better about how we set up conditions for stress. So I read an article not too long ago about how like millennials, like what they're known for is like this stress, always on the kind of rat race stress kind of wheel. Like that's what it, which sounds counterintuitive because some other people think millennials are known for like working from home and not actually working, right? But this was saying that like we were like the people who really just like put on this badge. If I'm stressed, then that means I am gonna get a promotion, or I'm gonna, like it's very clear that this exists in our society. And I think with the promise of AI, as long as it's used in a humanistic way, like I think there's a lot of promise there for us to recreate conditions that are less stressful. So anyway, I went off aside there, but yeah.
I like that you bring that up because I think that there is this narrative that if I'm stressed, then I'm productive. This is not necessarily the case, although that does seem to be something that we consider indicative of production. Like if I'm stressed, if I'm moving a lot, if I've got a lot on my plate, then I am really performing well. But and so it's having a life of ease and flow is not really valued. It's really funny what you said, Eryn, about how millennials, this was two contradictory ways of looking at millennials as being not having the work ethic that Gen X and boomers have, but valuing their free time and not working overtime. There's that too, but then there's also the if I'm stressed, then I'm productive. So that's really interesting.
And I want to say in that stress and that productive article, I want to give millennials credit here with that stress. They are productive too. Mm-hmm. Like, it is a matter of them like working too much.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
No, that's absolutely. But I think that I do feel, and I agree with you, I think there needs to be we need to look differently at how we view success and how we view productivity, and whether or not it is in our best interest to continue this narrative of being really busy, like the hustle culture, because there is a lot of value in having balance and also of having downtime and of not constantly going and doing, and you can be productive and also have downtime. But yet there's this kind of resistance, and I speak for myself, there is a resistance to taking a day off because there's this sense in my experience, there's a sense that if I take a day off, then the next day I'm going to have so much to catch up on top of the things that I have to do. But you can arrange things so that when you take a day off, everything that needed to get done before you took that day off got done. And so when you go back after that day off, you really aren't catching up. You're just, picking up where you left off. And so not having that fear of if I don't do, like if I'm not constantly working, if I don't take any time off, if I'm on call all the time, that kind of sense of urgency or that need, it's very common in the nonprofit world. This idea that we have to constantly be on call, especially among executive directors, because there's this sense that,
Yeah.
you know, if I don't do it, it won't get done. And if it doesn't get done, then it's on me and I have to make sure that I get it done. And so that is a recipe for burnout. And you don't want to burn out, because if you burn out, then, it's not just burning out in terms of just not having enough energy, but it's getting sick, getting a chronic illness. I mean, there's so many things that can happen if you continue on that, like, continue in the vein of, I have to get it done. No one else can get it done. Or even just feeling like I don't want to put more on their plate. So let me take all the extra stuff so that, because I know they have so much on their plate, but then you have so much on your plate. So where's the balance? And then, the innovative thinking, like, okay, how can I make this maybe not more on their plate or more on my plate, but maybe there's room for another position or maybe volunteers, or, that kind of thing, being creative about that. So there is definitely a culture of hustle and doing everything and getting everything done and putting a lot on your shoulders. This happens with parents as well, feeling like they have to do everything and carry everything for their children. And maybe they're a little bit afraid that if they let their child carry a little bit, that who knows what the fear is, but there's fear around that and need to control and need to dictate and all of those things. So where can we let things go? And where can we create opportunities for ease and flow? Because that is, I think, going to be the healthiest way to live, the healthiest way to exist is ease and flow. Yet we are in a society where ease and flow is considered lazy. There's all these very negative words around people who just take it easy, people who they have different priorities, and so they're kind of seen as lazy or just not valuable to society. So definitely there's room for looking at things differently, and AI might force us to do that, because if AI is being used instead of other jobs, and people will be without jobs, and so it is really going to kind of force us to think about how can we recreate the way that we define, how can we redefine success, how can we redefine the way that we contribute to society or the way that we make a living. Those things are really being tested, I think, as technology advances and as AI becomes more available to people and they're using it differently. And there's so many applications for AI. That's another episode all in its own. But yeah, definitely, I think we could definitely use some time to really reassess where we are and what we value and how can we have a more like a healthier society that fosters well-being.
Yeah, I think that is the promise of what AI could be. Ideally, is it's used as a catalyst to foster well-being in humans, and I think there's a lot of promise in that area. And even, I just want to make a observation. It seems like as you were talking in this last part, there was a little more sense of calm, maybe, or a little more when you said ease and flow. It was almost like it clicked, and maybe it was my own energy also, like that concept of ease and flow I think is such a cool one to use. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because we are the energy we put behind projects. So yeah, we can get a project done, like our journal, for instance, right? Like when I stress about things on this, I don't want to put that energy behind this. If it takes me a little more time to make a shift, that's okay, or make a change, that's okay. Just that idea of what energy am I putting behind the work that I'm doing, and the relationships that I have, and how I relate to myself. And I said that one last, and now I'm like, oh, maybe that should be the first one in those three, how I relate to my own self. and my own stress responses. And then that trickles out into everything else. But I'm definitely not the poster child for stress. I have really struggled with stress in a lot of ways throughout my career. And for me, it has always been the biggest driver of stress has been my work. It hasn't been my family as much, or my husband and kids. It hasn't been them as much, or my hobbies. Like, it's my work. So then it makes me curious. Why does that feel so much more stress driven than other parts of my life that still take up probably even more energy, right? So I think this is another way to think about how we relate to work, and what opportunities there are for stress in that way moving forward. And I always do this to myself too. Like, I'll be like, oh, I'm getting ready to meet a new client. And I get like really stressed, right? Really nervous. And then it's like, why did I do that? Because it's fine, right? Like, it's like this automatic response that I need to keep in check and talk back to and use breathing. But it's something that's so hardwired, like you said at the beginning, with our animal kind of instincts in a lot of ways. And then hardwired because of the conditions we live in, because of societal norms. And then it's also very hardwired in me too, because of, being raised in a farm background and a Catholic background, very like rigid of like, work is your calling. Work is what you do. And so anyway, I digress there a little bit, but just sometimes it can be helpful to, go back to the drawing board on where does this all come from? Oh, it comes from childhood. Okay. And how can I keep disrupting that pattern in my own life? So, yeah.
Yeah. So much to be learned from how we respond to stress and how we regulate, how we self-regulate, how we co-regulate, all of those things. So much to be learned from that. So I think this is a good time for a coaching nugget of wisdom. One that what comes to mind is what you said, Eryn, that you brought up about the ease and flow. So my coaching nugget of wisdom would be, where can you find opportunities for ease and flow in your life?
I like that. And I think that, and one that's standing out a little bit more robustly today from this conversation that I hadn't really framed it like this as much, as how do you disrupt your stress? And you get to be the agent that disrupts it, which gives you power and some creativity in that process.
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm LaShawn with Mayshell's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.